Hello and welcome to Week 8 on South and Southeast Asia after 1200. Let's start with geography and defining South and Southeast Asia. From prehistoric times, a culture has been shared by the area known as South Asia. South Asia is usually defined as a subcontinent occupied by India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Parts of Afghanistan also share South Asian cultural heritage, even though it resides outside the subcontinent. Southeast Asia includes the areas in pink on the map. Countries of Southeast Asia include Burma or Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, right there, and the Philippines. The area covered by this chapter is bordered by the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. India and Pakistan are bordered by China, Iran, and Afghanistan. Immediately southeast of Indonesia, actually right here at the bottom of the map, is Australia. The country India can be understood here, unless specifically stated otherwise, to include Pakistan and Bangladesh. India was one country, including these two nations, until partition in 1947, when India was divided into Hindu and Muslim states. We'll talk more about the effects of partition in Part 2. Let's talk about ancient South Asia. The oldest known civilization in the South Asian subcontinent of India is the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as IVC, which flourished from 3000 to 1300 BCE in the Indus River Valley. The Indus River you can see on the map here, and so the Indus River Valley is a surrounding area right there. The banks of the Indus River provided rich soil for agricultural purposes, much in the same way the Tigris and the Euphrates or the Nile did. The Harappan or IVC culture has extant sites in Mohenjo-Daro, Chanu-Daro, and Harappa in Pakistan. People of the Indus River Valley produced kiln-fired brick masonry with which the cities of the IVC were built. You can see an example at Mohenjo-Daro here with the so-called citadel in view, and also the great bath area here with sunken baths used for perhaps ritual purposes. Seals with figures and writing reveal a naturalistic style of depicting animals, as well as images of yogis or practitioners of yoga, an important practice that includes breathing and poses. Harappa also yielded many small earthenware sculptures of human-like and animal figures and chariots. You can see a lot more examples of objects from the IVC at harappa.com, which is linked in the module. The Indus Valley civilization started to decline around 1800 BCE. Recent scholarship suggests that significant climate changes made the agriculturally dependent cities of the IVC unviable due to persistent flooding. The sites were completely abandoned by 1300 BCE. Let's look at the Vedic period, from about 1750 to 322 BCE. During the Vedic period, we find the beginnings of Indian philosophy, literature, and religious practice. The Vedic period is named for the scriptures called the Vedas, which are believed to have been created in an oral tradition around 1500 BCE. These scriptures detailed hymns and rituals. The fantastic story of the Mahabharata, which includes the Bhagavad Gita, also dates to this era. And linked in the lecture, you can find a link to the story of the Mahabharata. These oral traditions, which were written down later during the Maurya period, form the basis of the Hindu belief system. Themes of revenge and reconciliation permeate Indian literature. During this long period, several major elements of Indian philosophy emerge. The concept of dharma held that individuals must perform religious duty according to his or her status, especially in Hinduism. Dharma also connotes law and knowledge from a Buddhist or Jainist standpoint. Indian people sought release from samsara, or reincarnation, through meditation and yoga, which became integral parts of most religious practices in India. Once achieving nirvana or moksha, freedom from suffering and physical existence, a person could become united with the universe. Three major world religions emerged from India during the Vedic period: Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. During the late medieval period, these religions continued to be the primary subject matter for Indian artists. Buddhism and Jainism offered a focus on the individual without regard to status or caste, and each focused on an individual's journey toward enlightenment. Buddhism and Jainism were non-materialistic, with an idealization of the ascetic lifestyle and a disdain for unnecessary wealth or goods. As might be expected, images of the Buddha aren't found until the Mauryan period, from 322 to 185 BCE. Mauryan rulers, starting with Ashoka, made Buddhism the state religion, and images of the Buddha and his stories started to become popular. Here you can see one image of the Buddha. Buddhist imagery also includes images of bodhisattvas, which you can see on the screen here, who according to Mahayana Buddhism were compassionate teachers. Buddhist and Hindu places of worship are microcosms of the universe. Each sits upon a circular or square base which represents the mandala, a mystic map of the universe. The mountain-shaped Buddhist stupa, which you can see on the screen, and the tower-like vimana or shikara of a Hindu temple, each represents the world mountain. The Buddhist stupa and Hindu temple each had an axis mundi, which connect the earth and the cosmos. We'll learn more about each of these religions as we view art made in their service below. The four Varnas established the first level of division in the Hindu caste system. Brahmin, which are priests; Kshatriya, which are warriors; Vaishya, which are merchants, herders, and artists; and Shudra, which are unskilled laborers. There's also a group outside of the caste system known as the untouchables, who are at the absolute bottom of the social structure of India. Buddhism and Jainism emerged as anti-caste alternatives to Hinduism. We'll talk more about the caste system in the section on modern India in part 2. Let's talk about the Indo-Aryan migration theory. Up until independence and partition, the end of the IBC or Harappa culture was believed by most Western scholars to have been caused by an invasion of foreign people known as the Indo-European Aryans. The Aryans are so called after the protagonists in the stories of the scriptures that we call the Vedas. The Indo-Aryan migration theory, once known as the Aryan invasion theory, posits that all of the developments of the Vedic period, including the Sanskrit language, the Vedas, Hindu deities, and the caste system, were brought to India through an invasion of a people from Central Asia. Before the discovery of IBC and Harappa culture in the early 20th century, this theory held that a superior people, the Aryans, overtook and imposed their culture on a backwards, inferior people, the indigenous Indians. After discovery of the IBC, the theory shifted, and the belief persisted that the invading warlike Aryans imposed their still superior militaristic culture upon a sophisticated indigenous culture. This theory has been largely disproven, but belief in it persists among some Western and South Asian scholars. It appears that really there was no widespread invasion. Today, the acculturation of Sanskrit language is no longer associated with the migration of a large number of people. While in the past, the Indo-Aryan migration theory was used to fuel racial division between the Aryan North and the Dravidian South, recent genetic study has found no significant difference between the people of North and South after 40,000 years ago. While the Indo-Aryan migration theory is no longer believed to hold the truth of the origins of Indian culture, it's important from an historical standpoint. It's one example of the ways in which narratives are invented based on assumptions of the inferiority of non-Westerners. At the point where our text picks up with Indian history, the late medieval period, Hinduism has emerged as the dominant religion in India, overtaking Buddhism. However, we'll see that the country is soon united and ruled by Muslim leaders. Buddhists start after 1200. Though it flourished for centuries, in the late medieval period, Buddhism was in decline everywhere in India but in the northeast. Indian Tantrayana or Tantric Buddhism traces its roots to neighboring Tibet and Nepal, and seems to have emerged in the 7th century CE. Tantric Buddhism is a variation on Mahayana Buddhism and is also known as esoteric Buddhism. Images of bodhisattvas remain popular in Tantric Buddhism. Early Mahayana Buddhism developed the concept of the bodhisattva, a human being who's on the cusp of enlightenment, which is the goal of Buddhism, but chooses to forego nirvana, the rebirth as a spiritual being, in order to stay on earth and teach others. The bodhisattva of greatest compassion, Avalokiteshvara, also known as Padmapani, is depicted as bodhisattvas typically have been since the Gandhara period. And the gilt bronze images here and here, Avalokiteshvara has an idealized, soft body and wears rich clothing. The bodhisattva here is in a pose of royal ease, especially in this particular one. The version shown here shows the bodhisattva in a tribhanga or three bend pose, which conveys the figure's wisdom and beauty, and the three bends refer to the slight bend in the neck and in the waist and in the hip. Bodhisattvas and Buddha are often shown resting on a lotus flower throne, which symbolizes the emergence of wisdom from the muck as flowers from a pond. Tantric art included images of other important figures such as Maya, the royal mother of the Buddha. In this image from Nepal, Maya and a miniature Siddhartha or Buddha emerging from her side, and the famous tree here are given very rich treatment with gold leaf and precious stones adorning the sculpture. Another important art form to emerge from Tantrayana is the tanka painting. A tanka painting is mounted on embroidered silk and, in addition to being beautiful, aids the worshiper in tantric practice. The tanka painting provides a visualization of the divine, a concept known as darshana. Darshana is important to all deity-centered Indian religions, of which Tantrayana is one. Mahayana and Theravada or Hinayana Buddhism are not deity-centered. The late medieval style figure was influential on the depictions of bodhisattvas throughout Buddhist Asia. In Southeast Asia, Theravada, also known as Hinayana Buddhism, flourished alongside Hinduism. The shape of the Shwe Dagon stupa in Burma or Myanmar is based on the original stupa. In both South and Southeast Asia, the round shape of the Mahastupa is elongated into a more bell-like form. The Shwe Dagon stupa is also similar to an Indian Buddhist stupa in its function as a reliquary for remains of the Buddha. Followers walk around the stupa rather than enter it, as was also customary for the original stupas in India. The Shwe Dagon stupa is also known as the Golden Stupa for obvious reasons. The refined sculpture of the Buddha calling the earth to witness from Thailand is typical of images of Buddha in southern India and Southeast Asia. The top knot on the head of the Buddha becomes flame-like, and the Buddha's features and limbs become sleek, elegant, and stylized. Jain art after 1200. Jainism dates back to its last of 24 great Tirthankaras or pathfinders, named Mahavira. who lived from 599 to 527 BCE. The word Jain originates from the word Jina, another name for Tirthankara. Like Buddhism, Jainism presents an antithesis to what followers perceive to be the unjust social stratification of Hinduism. Also like Buddhism, Jainism is an ascetic practice which seeks liberation from samsara. Jainism differs from Buddhism in that it is strictly anti-violence. Followers choose professions that allow them to avoid violence to any living being. Some followers even wear face masks in order to avoid killing microscopic organisms. While Hinduism and most forms of Buddhism encourage followers to avoid meat when possible, Jainists are strict vegetarians. Extraordinarily popular even in India today, Jainism seeks rebirth. Through purification by undoing bad karma, Jain followers can achieve unfettered spiritual existence. Followers are encouraged to meditate for extended periods of time and are often shown in the lotus position or a standing position known as Kayat Sarga, which you can see here. Both poses can be seen in these images. Here's the Kayat Sarga pose, a standing pose. Jains or Jinas are believed to have followed an austere form of asceticism, a lifestyle choice which is limited by which is imitated, by some devoted Jainists. A Jainist renouncer, as he or she is called, might wear no clothing, as in the statue of the Jaina you can see here and in here. A serious follower of the Jainas might live a life so austere that he or she starves to death while meditating. The 60-foot tall statue of Gomata, the ascetic, details the vines which grow and wrap about the body during his lengthy meditation. Jain temples are similar in appearance to Hindu temples, with Vimana or Shikara towers and mandapas or covered meeting halls. The Kalpa Sutra, one of the central books of Jainism, is a popular subject for manuscript illumination in late medieval India. Often depicted is the birth of Mahavira, shown in his mother's arms in a palatial setting. The drawing is calligraphic or script-like in its lyricism, reminding viewers of elegant Sanskrit. Exaggerated and abstracted features like the bulging eyes are typical of Jain art of the late medieval period.